Welcome to an advanced tutorial of AttackForge ReportGen. Version 2.0 we have prepared for BlackHat USA Arsenal 2022. For those of you who don't know us yet, I'm Stas and I'm joined by Phil. We are co-founders of AttackForge. We built a Pentest management platform as well as a free tool we call ReportGen, which helps pentesters to write reports faster and easier. After all, no one likes writing reports. We also created a library of free templates of different types of reports. We'll show you how to access this library and, at the end, how you can use those templates with your own reporting data.
So ReportGen is a tool that we've been improving for years now. And earlier this year, we released version 2.0, which has major enhancements. Now this tool can be used with any reporting data that's in a JSON format. Anybody can download and start using ReportGen straight away. How it works is you feed the tool JSON data, which has your findings, as well as a docx template, and it gives you back a report. It's that easy. Creating templates is also a breeze. You start with your current docx report, the one that you're already using for your customers. Also, you can start with one of our free templates that we already provide. Then you make all your style changes inside Word. So there's no need to program your templates or any of your styles. So first, let's take a look at the tool. There's three different ways we can download ReportGen. The first way is from our website. If you go to attackforge.com and then click on Community, from here we can scroll a little bit down and there's a button there, AttackForge ReportGen. And if we click on that, the tool will open in a new tab. The second way is to go to attackforge.com/reportgen.html, and that will also take you to the tool. And the last way is from our community platform, attackforge.community. Once you log in, you can click on Custom Reports, and then from here, click on Download ReportGen. So now that we've downloaded the ReportGen tool, we're going to start by clicking on Community and then clicking on docx. And this will take you to the main ReportGen interface. All of the release notes for all the improvements and enhancements we've been making to the tool can be found on the main page. You can scroll down to see examples of different new functionality and how they can be used inside different templates. At the top, we have a number of different tabs, and each of these tabs will take you to various areas to help you with getting started on your templates. We're going to start by clicking on Templates and then seeing a list of all of the different templates that come as standard with the AttackForge tool. Now you can download any of these templates and start using them for your security testing and auditing based reports. We're going to take a look at the Pentest report version 2 sample and see what that looks like. ReportGen is a very versatile tool. There's a lot we can do for Pentest and other security testing reports using AttackForge ReportGen. So here's an example of a Pentest report template. Here we can see all of the different sections that you can consider to include inside your template. So for example, we can have a contents page, which covers the information about the assessment as well as perhaps some customer information. Table of contents to make navigation easy. Executive summary section. So it's always good to have an executive summary in the report to provide a really brief overview of how the assessment went and the key information for the audience of the report. Using ReportGen, you can have information relating to different types of findings, progress, test cases, and a little summary of the overall assessment. ReportGen does support images as well as captions as well. The testing summary is a section you can have in your Pentest report, which provides a little bit more information about the overall project itself in terms of how the testing had progressed, what had actually been done, who did the testing, what were the test window, as well as information relating to the scope, the project team and their role, all of the retesting history, and any sort of notes that you want to capture for the reader as well. The summary findings is where you can use ReportGen to have a table of every unique vulnerability and also its remediation status. Using ReportGen, you can make very simple and easy inline style changes. So in this case, we can have shaded backgrounds, cell backgrounds, and also different colors for different statuses of vulnerabilities. Here we've got a sort of a list of how many different affected assets there are for each unique vulnerability, and also their remediation status. And again, using ReportGen to create some logic conditions for different coloring for each vulnerability to easily identify whether it's still open or closed. Now, attack chains is a really cool AttackForge feature that we have, and you can build these for your pen tests or different types of assessments. And what it does is it gives the reader a really sort of visual illustration of certain types of attack paths or objectives that were reached during the assessment. So in this case, as part of this web application pen test, we were able to take over the application server and get onto the client's internal network. And the reader of the report can see exactly what we did along each step of the way in a very sort of simple and easy to understand flow. Using ReportGen, you can use any of the inbuilt images for each of these links in the chain, or you can swap them out for your own images as well. For every single vulnerability in the template, we can see here there's we're using color to illustrate the priority of the vulnerability. And then we're providing a description, attack scenario, and recommendation for each vulnerability, as well as any supporting tags and information that they may need. Separately, we can have a section in the report which details all of the affected assets. So for example, globexcorp.com.au was affected by this unrestricted upload vulnerability. And here we can see all of its remediation history, notes, as well as styled proof of concepts. Now, ReportGen does support ability to define your own styles. So here we can see in the styles pane, the templates can have a custom code snippet, custom headings for level 1, 2, and 3. And similarly here we can see that we have also AF images, which is used to apply a style to all of these inline images, as well as their corresponding captions or file descriptions. Scrolling through the report, we'll see all of the other vulnerabilities, again using color to illustrate which priority these vulnerabilities are. And as we get to the bottom, we'll see some information around test cases. So it's always good to let the reader know when this report was generated, what was actually done, and separately what was still being tested or in progress, as well as not tested. And perhaps there might have been some areas which were not applicable. So we can also document that and provide some supporting evidence. Using ReportGen, you can build completely custom sections. And what that means is we're going to show you how to define logic conditions and use things like AttackForge functions and filters in order to create really sort of bespoke tables or sections within your report. So here's an example where we want a table that demonstrates OWASP top 10 mapping against all of those 26 unique vulnerabilities we have. And we're going to show you how to effectively use ReportGen to build these custom sections. Also, we've got a vulnerability to asset mapping, and again, using color coding there to help the reader very quickly understand the status of these vulnerabilities and how many assets have been affected by each one. And also the opposite, so having an asset to vulnerability mapping. And that's very useful for the reader to, again, use color in a very simple way to understand which vulnerabilities apply to which assets and what's also the remediation status for each of those. So now that we've seen what type of pentest reports we can build using ReportGen, let's take a look at the template that actually was used to build that example report and see how it works. So we're going to, inside the tool, come back to templates and then click on the template for Pentest Report v2. So here on the left hand side, we have the template, and on the right hand side, we have the example report that it produces. So we can see that from a style perspective, they're actually very similar. The difference on the left hand side, we have these meta tags, and we're going to come back to that in a moment to see how we can use those different tags to end up with having that data in the final report. Let's compare the two as we go through the different sections. So here on the left hand side, we can see what the executive summary looks like from a templating perspective. We can see that all of the colors for the critical, high, medium, low, and informational are actually just applied by introducing a color through Microsoft Word to that tag itself. You can introduce multi-column page layouts if preferred. Otherwise, you can just stick with a single column layout as well. Having a look at the testing summary, we can see that, again, all of the information that gets substituted is actually done automatically. And the benefits of using ReportGen is that it takes a lot of the pain away from having to manually adjust the reports after they've been generated. Here we can see all of the different sections relating to the testing summary, as well as the scope on the project and how the project team is constructed, as well as all of the retesting history and project notes. So here we can see how we create the summary findings table. So what we've done is we've created a different row for each type of vulnerability and added some logic to determine what colors and status we want represented when it's either open or closed. And very similarly here for the list of vulnerabilities themselves. So here we have the attack chains, and we can see that every link in the chain has its own image, which can be substituted for any type of image that you would be looking to use. You can use any of the ones which are already existing in this template, or you can add your own ones. We do have a different colored image matching also the priority of each vulnerability as well. So now we have each of the vulnerability sections themselves, and we can see that for each critical, high, medium, low, and informational vulnerability, there will be a either purple, red, yellow, blue, or green section, which makes it very easy when scanning across the report. We can see where the description, attack scenario, and recommendation will be inserted, as well as all the other sections for the affected assets, remediation notes, and also the proof of concept or steps to reproduce. So on the left hand side, we can see how the test cases are constructed in the template, and we'll see in a moment what that actually looks like in the output. So here we have the section for completed test cases, as well as in progress, not tested, and not applicable. And we can see all of the different information which will be produced, including any evidence and screenshots if relevant to the test case. Now we have the custom section we've created for OWASP Top 10 mapping. Now again, this doesn't particularly have to be related to OWASP Top 10. It's there as a demonstration on how we can use what we refer to as functions and also custom tagging to produce logic which then provides a section with information that we're only interested in. So here what we're doing is constructing a new list of vulnerabilities which we're going to call OWASP Top 10 vulnerabilities. And once we've found all that information, we're going to then present it in this table format. And the output on the right hand side is a list of all of the OWASP Top 10 vulnerabilities that were discovered as part of this application pen test. So the vulnerability to asset mapping, we can see how that gets constructed on the left hand side as part of the template, particularly with all the different color combinations for each different priority. And similarly, how the asset to vulnerability mapping is also constructed. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a template, we're going to combine it with some JSON data, and that's going to produce a report. So considering we've already downloaded the template and already had a look at that, what we're going to do now is get some test data in a JSON format that we're going to use to then populate those tags that we were just looking at. So inside ReportGen, within the template section, we can click on this button here, download test data JSON, and we can see what that looks like. So here we have the test data file that you can download from the ReportGen tool. You'll notice that it is in JSON format. And if you stick around till the end, we'll show you how you can load your own custom JSON file and use it with ReportGen. So this test data file is structured in a few different sections. We have a section which has some of the project related information, such as the name, the code, and groups, custom tags and custom fields for the project, an executive summary section which has some information about the overall vulnerabilities as well as exec summary notes, a testing summary section which has information about key dates, progress, assets, project team, and retesting history, as well as project notes. Now we have a vulnerability summary section which has information about each individual unique vulnerability and counts around the total affected assets. We have the attack chains, and now we have the details for each individual vulnerability, including information about the vulnerability such as its title, priority, descriptions, attack scenarios, recommendations and tags, and CVSS scores. And then for each unique vulnerability, we have all of its affected assets, including the name of the asset and steps to reproduce, as well as any remediation notes or history. After that, we have information about all of the test cases, as well as the vulnerability to asset mapping and asset to vulnerability mapping. Now let's see how we can use this test data file to produce a report using that template. Back in the ReportGen tool, we're going to start by clicking on Select your docx template. And now we're going to select the template that we downloaded from ReportGen. The next step is to select a JSON file. So let's select the test data that we just downloaded and had a look at. And now we have a report. Let's see what it looks like. So let's take a look at the deliverable. So what we have here is a report that was just built using that template and the test data that we downloaded from the tool. We can see that we have a complete pen test report with all of the relevant sections that you would normally expect to find in any type of Pentest report. And it was so easy to generate. All we had to do was select the template and select the JSON file. We have all of the information that we would normally expect to see in a Pentest report. And you can adjust your templates to any desired style, or even have a different template for different types of teams, audiences, customers. They're really easy to make changes because all the changes happen inside Word itself. You can take advantage of things like lists, numbering, headings, styles, all of the tools which are already built in Microsoft Word are at your disposal as part of your template. So let's take a look at how we can make some changes to a template and then rerun the report and see what it looks like. So on the left hand side, we have our template. So the first thing we're going to do is get rid of that AttackForge logo and add our own logo to the title page. Again, we're using Microsoft Word to insert the image, adjust it, align it to our desired look and feel. Next thing we're going to do is to give this table a different colored background. So here we've got a black background now, and we're also going to make this text yellow. Okay, so now we're going to save the template, and on the right hand side, we're going to select this template as well as the JSON data and see what the report looks like. So here we have our report, and we can see that the logo has been applied, the black background for the name of the report's also been applied, as well as the yellow font color change to the type of the report. So applying styles and adjusting the format of your reports is super easy using ReportGen because all of it can be done inside Word. So now let's actually take a look at how we can start using those tags and where to find them. So back inside the ReportGen tool, we're going to click on tags, and that's going to give us some information now about all the different tags which are supported inside the templates. We're going to come back and see how this data tag can be used later on for your custom JSON files. However, if we see here we have, for example, project name, and it says it will provide the name of the project. And if we look in our template, we have that tag project name there. So when this template gets run, what we expect to see is the name of the project being replaced for that tag. And similarly here for the project code, which shows just underneath. Now for the timestamp, we're also using a date format filter. So we're going to have a look at filters in a moment. And separately here we can see project custom tags. And there's some more information here if we click that link on how we can use custom tags in ReportGen. But in general, you can use any of these tags inside your templates to produce the data that you need. There's hundreds and hundreds of tags that you can use anywhere in your template to ensure that you have a highly bespoke report that's suited for your audience and your reporting needs. So back inside ReportGen, we're now going to have a look at all the filters which are available to use inside the templates. So we're going to click on filters, and now we can see each filter. The first one is sort, and sort can be used to sort data in ascending or descending. So here we can have an example of how we can sort our vulnerabilities based on the CVSS score in ascending. You can do multi-key sorts and multi-directional sorts. The date format filter allows you to adjust all your dates in your report to your desired format. So back in our template, we're using a full date format, but here we can see how we can use other types of formats which are either named, or we can create our own mask as well for a completely custom timestamp. So here we have another filter which can be used to do things like show me all critical and easily exploitable vulnerabilities. So here we can see how that filter gets applied to the vulnerabilities, and where we set the value for easily exploitable and critical. You can apply those filters at different levels, for example against custom tags, as well as combining them with functions, which we're going to have a look at in a moment. The has any and has all filters are also quite useful. You can use those for doing simple logic conditions such as, do the tags have any CVEs listed in them? So does this vulnerability, is it affected by any CVEs? And if so, let's print a separate section to display that. Or if not, let's let the reader know that there were no CVEs identified. There's many different types of filters that you can access to make your reporting much easier. So let's actually have a look at functions and see how they can also help. So now back in the ReportGen tool, we're going to click on functions from the menu. And here we're going to see all the different types of functions that AttackForge ReportGen supports. Functions are a powerful way to introduce logic into your templates. For example, you can declare variables and then use those variables in different ways to store temporary values that you may want to use within your reports, or even just use them as simply as counters, which can then be used as logic gates in your reports. So for example, here on the left hand side in our template, we're using the declare function to declare a new variable called OWASP top 10, and we're also declaring it as an empty array. Then we're going to open a loop on vulnerabilities, and for each vulnerability we're going to loop through its affected assets. And then we're going to check those affected assets to see whether it has a OWASP top 10 tag and that value has been set to true. So what that actually means is that this vulnerability should be considered as part of OWASP top 10. And if that's the case, we're going to use another function called push. And push allows us to then push the value into a variable. So here we're going to say we want to assign a value to this variable, which was declared further up using that first function. And then we're going to push the parent scope. So similar to Linux style, where we can say ... to go up a level, or ... to refer to the current scope. And what we end up with is actually a list of all OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, which then using the value function allows us to now have a list of OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities, which we can then use for different purposes, such as producing this table. The helper function allows you to diagnose and troubleshoot your template in case you may have any sort of parsing issues. The helper function can help you to see what information you have in your current scope, as well as what's the value of those variables at the time that helper function runs within your report. So for example, if we wanted to see what value we have for the affected asset, in our template, we would include that helper function. And when we run our report, what we would expect to see if we inspect the browser console is for every affected asset that's this loop is running over, the helper function will execute and it will provide us information with relation to the scope. That can be used to then identify what type of data is immediately available to you inside this loop. And you can use that data to then put it into your report, or separately, if we wanted to traverse up the structure and go from affected asset to its vulnerability and all the way to the root level using the parents, you can use that functionality to then access any data that you want from anywhere within your JSON can be injected at any part of your template. Similarly, if we run the similar helper function, it will also produce the value of the variables. And here we can see through this counter that the variable is increasing every time it runs. So let's actually start from the basics. We're going to now start building a template from the ground up using a blank docx file. And we're going to run through some scenarios to form a solid foundation on how to use ReportGen and start building your own template. So let's actually build a new template from the ground up. So on the left hand side, I have a new docx file that I've just created. And I've started placing in some basic tags so we can start experimenting. So here on the left, we have project code and project name. And as well as we want the start date and end date of the project, and we want to use a date format filter to show the date in day, month, year format. We also want the progress of the assessment to also be displayed on this page. So if we look here on the right hand side, we can see that all of that information has rendered when we ran the report. And again, we can use the tags as a reference for the different types of tags we want to introduce in our report template. So we were using project name, project code, and timestamp, as well as progress. So let's look at the next example. Here we have a template which says we want to loop through vulnerabilities. And for each vulnerability, we want to print its priority, the title, description, attack scenario, and recommendation. So what we do is we start by opening a loop on vulnerabilities. And if we go back to our tags and scroll a little bit further down, we'll see here on the left-hand side, there'll be one called vulnerabilities. And what that gives us is a list of all the vulnerabilities on the project. And then as properties of vulnerabilities, we can see description, attack scenario, as well as recommendation. Now, to map these tags to the JSON, if we also come to the vulnerability section within the JSON file, we'll see here that there's also, for each vulnerability, there is a description, attack scenario, and recommendation. So now you can start to see how these tags are mapping to actual data within a JSON file. And if we go back to the report, we'll see here on the right-hand side that when the report runs, we expect to see a vulnerability show with its priority, its title, description, attack scenario, and recommendation. And when it gets to the end, we're also going to tell it to do a page break. Now, what's important to observe here is that this tag has a hashtag in front of it. And what that hashtag means is we want to open a loop. So if we remove that hashtag, this wouldn't work because vulnerabilities itself is a list or an array of different types of vulnerabilities. And if we look at the JSON, we'll see here that it's actually a JSON array of objects. So what we need to do is open that loop using the hashtag, and then any of the tags which are inside that loop will then be rendered for every single item in that loop. So for every one of these objects, which is a vulnerability, we then will have access to its data. Now we need to make sure we close the loop, and that's what we're doing at the bottom here by putting in a backslash. Now, if you don't close your loops, you will get pass errors when you try to run your report, and it will tell you that you have unclosed loops. So make sure to keep an eye on all the loops that you have open when you're troubleshooting your templates. So here we have an example of where we're using the helper function in order to show us what information we have access to when we're looping through affected assets. So we're starting by opening a loop on vulnerabilities and then opening a loop on affected assets. And if we look at the JSON structure, we'll see that we're opening this loop on vulnerabilities and we have access to this information. And then we're opening another loop on affected assets. Now keep in mind that affected assets are the actual assets themselves which have this vulnerability. So what we'd like to see is what information do we actually have access to inside the template without having to go and look at the JSON. So that's where we print this helper function. And if we inspect our browser console after we run the report, we'll see that within the available tag section, our helper function has run for each one of those loops on affected assets. And if we open it up, we can see exactly what information we have access to within the scope. So here we can see that for this affected asset, we can access its name if we used asset as a tag, or separately access any of its other information such as proof of concepts, CVSS scores, or any other information we need. Separately, we can see if we go one level up, what information we would have. And in this case, this is for the vulnerability itself. So we can see that here's the title of the vulnerability. And then we can go all the way up to the root. So this helps us with understanding what information we have and how to get that information we need. We can always print any information in the immediate scope, or we can move up the tree and then back down the tree to access other information we may need as well. So here's another helper function we can run to see the information for different variables which we've declared using functions. So here in our template, we've declared a number of different variables. So we can see that my variable 1 is declared as a boolean for true value. My variable 2 is declared as a number. My variable 3 is declared as a string. My variable 4 is declared as an empty array. My variable 5 is now declared as the value of my variable 3. Now that's really handy because now we can start to combine different values together to get more powerful logic. My variable 6 is the immediate scope. My variable 7 is vulnerabilities array, and we're using this JavaScript notation to say, give me the first element of that array, which is item 0. And then we're printing the helper function. So let's actually take a look at what information that would give us. So my variable 1, no surprises, as well as my variable 2, that's been declared as a boolean and as a number. Here we have the string, here we have the empty array, and here we have my variable 5, which was declared as the value of my variable 3. Looking at my variable 6, this was the immediate scope. Now, because we're not inside any sort of loops or anything at this point in time, because we're declaring this at the top level, therefore the current scope is the entire JSON data structure. So we can see that all of that information is now available in the current scope for my variable 6. And we can see that my variable 7 is the first vulnerability in the list, which was declared using that syntax. So now we're going to have a look at how we can introduce conditions as well as rendering images. So here we can see that as we're looping through vulnerabilities, we're adding a condition where we want to say that only if the priority is equal to critical do we want to proceed and present this information in the report. So these hashtags can be used to open a loop, or they can separately be used to open a condition. Now, if the vulnerability is critical, then we'll expect to see that the title will be printed and then a loop on each of its affected assets. Now we can use this percentage sign as a way to translate data from a base64 image format within the JSON file to an actual image within Word. So we can see how that information can be presented both within the steps to reproduce as well as within the notes. And at the bottom here, we're using this hat symbol to indicate an inverse logic to that condition. So for example, if there's notes, we want to print the note for each one and any supporting screenshots in line. However, if there is no notes, we want to print no notes found. So that's where we can use that little hat to negate the expression in order to have a more like a if-else type condition in the report. So let's take a look at tables. So what we want to do is produce a table which has a list of every vulnerability, its title, as well as its remediation status. So how we do that in ReportGen is we create a new table in Word, and in this second row we open a loop on vulnerabilities, and then we say for each vulnerability we want to print its priority, its title, as well as its remediation status. And then we can close the loop at the end, and the ReportGen tool will recognize that this is running in a row, and it will create a new row for every object that it iterates over. In this case, for every vulnerability that is present within vulnerabilities. And the output we can see here on the right is a list of every vulnerability. Now let's say we'd like to start introducing some colors. So what we're doing now is we're still opening a loop on vulnerabilities. However, we're adding conditions. So here we're saying if priority is equal to critical, then we want to print the priority in this color. And then we're going to close that condition. And then we're going to open another condition and do much the same, except this time for high. And if it's high, we're going to print the priority in a red color. And we'll continue to do that for each condition we'd like to have a different color for. Now, for the remediation status, we're also going to apply the same logic. However, in this case, we're just writing open and closed to demonstrate that you don't have to just put the tag itself. What this will do is say, if the remediation status is open, you can write whatever you need. You may not want open, you may want not fixed. And then you can use that structure to then show not fixed for each vulnerability that hasn't been remediated. And similarly, you can do the same thing for closed. Now going one step further, let's say we'd like cell shading. Now, because the cell shading applies to the actual background for the first cell in this row, therefore we can't just have all of our logic in this one cell, like we did on the previous example, as that would end up presenting every single row with the same colored background. So what we're doing instead is we're opening a loop for vulnerabilities. We're filtering it on critical priority only, and then we're printing the title and remediation status. And then we're closing the loop on vulnerabilities. And then we're going to apply the same logic in another row for high, medium, low, and informational. So what we would expect is that every critical vulnerability will have a new row which has that maroon colored background. And what we can see here on the right hand side is exactly that behavior. Now, if you wanted your tags to be center aligned, AttackForge supports all of those options natively within Word. So we could go ahead and center align or right align those tags, and they will be right aligned when the report gets run. So in this example, we're using filters. So here we can see where for tags, for each vulnerability, we want to print its title, loop through its affected assets, print the CVSS scores, and then check to see if any CVEs exist. So this is where we're using a has any filter, and we're checking for CVE or its lowercase value. And if so, we're going to then open a section which then says CVEs, and we can see that here in the output. Now we're going to reopen a loop on tags, and for each tag we're now going to run a condition on this. And for those of you who've worked with JavaScript, this is just a way to refer to itself. Now the reason we're doing that is because if we look at tags within the JSON, we can see that it's actually a string array. So unlike custom fields or custom tags, which are an object of key value pairs, in that scenario, we would have a different way to refer to this key. However, this is a string array, which means we have to refer to itself. And that's where we can use this. So now we're using the includes filter to say if this value has CVE in it, then we're going to print it. And again, we're using the dot to refer to itself. So what we actually have now is if a tag has CVE, it will then print the tag. And in this case, it will print the CVEs in the list. Now, we can use that inverse logic to say if a tag doesn't have any CVEs, we now want to print a section that says no CVEs found. And we can see that here for this vulnerability. And if we go back to the JSON, we'll see that if we look at that first vulnerability, we'll see that there are CVEs listed within the tags. So CVE 123 and CVE 456. And they're the ones which get listed within the template, within the output. So now let's look at how we can access custom tags and custom fields. So the first one here is on project custom tags. And what we're saying is let's open a loop on project custom tags. And then for each tag, let's check if client name exists. And if so, we're going to print the name of the client. And similarly, if a tag exists for the address, we want to print the address. And if we go back to the JSON, we'll see here that for project custom tags, we have client name, client address, and testing location. So we open the loop, and then for each item, so each object, we're checking for existence of that key. And if it exists, we want to print its value. So now we're going to look at how we can do it at the vulnerability level and at the affected asset level. So we're going to first open a loop on vulnerabilities and then check its vulnerability custom fields in this case. and check for OWASP category custom field with a value of option 1, or so again using JavaScript syntax. So all of your conditions do support JavaScript equality and or operators. So in this case, or has a custom field of CWE top 25, which is equal to true. So if we come back to the JSON, we'll see that here within its custom fields, we have OWASP category option 1, which means this condition will pass. So now it's going to print the priority and the title of the vulnerability, which we can see here on the right hand side. So now the next condition is on affected assets, and it says check the assets custom tags and check if there is a tag called source and it has a value of internal, and if so, print the name of the asset. So if we come back to the JSON, we'll see that this is the first vulnerability. We can see that these conditions have passed, so it's now going to loop through its affected assets. And then we can see here for this affected asset, it has a custom tag called source and it has a value of internal. Therefore, this condition will pass and the name of the asset will print. So here we can see how by using the @ symbol on these style tags, we can then render the data in a styled format. So here we have the exec summary section with heading 1s and heading 2s, as well as the center aligned images with the caption underneath. And separately for the styled proof of concept, we can see how we can capture code snippets as well as unordered and ordered lists as well. So now let's take a completely custom JSON file. So here we have a JSON file which has a scan name. It also has a list of vulnerabilities, and each vulnerability has a name and a list of IPs. So how would we write a template to render this information in a report? So here on the right hand side, we're using this property called data, and data gives you access to the top level element within your JSON data structure. So in this case, data is equal to everything highlighted. So now we can say that we want to print data.scanName. So that is this key as part of this object, and this object being data. So we want that bold, and we want that to print as the first item. So now we want to open a loop on the vulnerabilities. So we would open a loop on data.vulns, being this key on data. And then for that, for every vulnerability, we want to print the name as well as a list of every IP. So that's where we would open a loop on IPs, and we can add a bullet list to print each IP. So what does this actually look like? We can see the output here. So we have the scan name, the vulnerability, and a list of every IP that is affected by those vulnerabilities. So again, this is how you can use ReportGen with any type of custom JSON file and data structure and map it to some type of report output.
As you can see, you start with your own data in JSON format, and then using ReportGen, you can create sophisticated reports for different audiences, even using different logos. We built ReportGen primarily for Pentest reporting. However, people are telling us they are also using it for compliance reports, risk reports, vulnerability and code review summaries. Most people start with their own templates and apply the necessary tags to get their data into the report. Others start with our templates, then make changes to look and feel, to personalize the reports for their customers. In both cases, the learning curve is short and results are immediate.
So as a reminder, you can follow the links on our website to download ReportGen, or you can download it directly from our community platform, and that's attackforge.community. Templates are already built into the tool, and we're constantly adding new templates. So make sure to check out the template library every so often. ReportGen also has links to comprehensive support pages that will help you at every stage of the template building process. So have a go and let us know what you think. Enjoy the rest of the presentations at BlackHat USA Arsenal for 2022. There are plenty of amazing tools on show for all of you security folks. Thanks for watching.